John Summers is the motoring historian. He was a company car thrashing technology sales rep that turned into a fairly inept sports bike rider. Hailing from California, he collects cars and bikes built with plenty of cheap and fast, and not much reliable. On his show, he gets together with various co-hosts to talk about new and old cars, driving, motorbikes, motor racing, and motoring travel.
Good day, good morning, good afternoon. It is John Summers, the motoring historian. Part 4 of the Best of the Bay driving days that I did. So a review of the Fiat 500E, the electric one, the Dodge Durango Hellcat, the one with the 707 horsepower Hellcat motor, as you might expect from the name, and the Acura ZDX, which that company was kind of forgettable. But yeah, without further ado.
So it's applicable. I've just taken a swig of my espresso because the next thing I drove was the Fiat 500E. This is easily the smallest and least impressive of the stuff that we drove in terms of look at my swinging kind of thing, but a perfectly adequate product. Plasticky on the inside, but I mean, who cares, right? This is an economy car. I actually like the simplicity of the design. As I say, I struggled to, as I was saying in another part of the presentation here, I struggled to find out how to make it go. I found the start button, then I was like, how do I put it into gear? And they've moved the buttons onto the center console, like where normally the heater controls or the radio would be back in a car from the 20th century. But, obviously once it's like cut and paste. Once they've showed you how to do it, once you know how to drag and drop a paragraph around in Word, you're like, oh, my life is changed forever. It's that feeling, once you know how to do it, it's easy, right? And it becomes hard to believe that you were ever numpty enough not to know how to pop it in gear. First thing I wrote down about it was that it has very aggressive regenerative braking, and you can modulate that, but it's clear that there's less thought gone into the design of how the one pedal driving experience is, far less than, Hyundai spent on the Ioniq or Lucid did. And really the comparison between the Fiat 500 and the Lucid, it shows just in the, with practice, you can drive the Fiat smoothly, but it does take a little bit of practice, and it's a little bit herky-jerky, more as Citroën used to be than the way my mum used to be trying to drive a car with a clutch. Forgive me, mum, but you were very jumpy in that white Fiesta that we had. So 500 was a facelift, right? So it's got like streaks across the lights and things. On the face of it, you might look at it and be like, is that even a new model? The answer is yes, it is. The more you look, the more you'll see how it's a new model. Stylish. Actually, when you look closely, stylish evolution of the design. It's got a big EV whine, like a real, hi, I'm electric, like that milk float sound. For those of us who grew up in suburban England in the late 20th century, the whine of the milk float is there. I'm not a fan. I mean, I never was going to be a fan of this kind of car, and I don't like, as I think I've said elsewhere in the presentation, I don't like the fact that Fiat 500s always have this sit up and beg position. Did I like it? No. Was it a good car? Yes. Is it the right solution for many people? Yes. Although I just wonder, would you buy it new and eat the depreciation? I'd probably try and find some second-hand EV where some other tree-hugging schmuck had eaten the depreciation pill earlier. I wrote here, tile raw noticeable. It's fine around town. Screen and air conditioning are easy to use. Oh, there's an amusing thing that happened. A couple of times, a couple of the cars, the technology sort of tripped up. So the Honda, it wanted to brake because it saw the car in front braking. So it was like, emergency, like a car in front. It's stopping, you got to brake. And I'm like, dude, I'm like 50 feet away from the car in front, cool your boots. And it settled down once the car had turned off. But I'd never had that before where the car had been oh, we're going to crash because the gauge flashed red. I said, what kind of car has 500 horsepower and is like a old mother hen like that? It's really bizarre. Sorry, Acura. Jake, the rep from Acura, really nice guy, but the product it's not that the product is off the pace, because it isn't, right? Because that Honda Prologue that low, wide stance really cool. But there was, I don't know, I mean, the car had only done 100 miles, the Acura ZDX that did this like flash for me. So I don't know, maybe those kind of warning systems were still tuning themselves in. But that was the most serious incident where the technology got in my way and was like, and you're like, dude, just settle the fuck down and act like you were a 1980s CRX. The Fiat 500, its one was the AI, the voice listening, the voice sensing thing must have been working, because at one point I was talking to myself. I don't know what I said, but I said something out loud and the car was like, what was that? Can I help you? Pardon? And all this kind of, the car's trying to start a damn conversation with me. And all I'd done was like mutter about somebody moving into my lane. It was like I'd done like oh, fucking hell or something like that. I just had one of those and the car was like, what? Like, can I help you? Like, sir, would you like a paper hat with that? And I'm just like, get out of my face, dumb technology. Oh, I also triggered the emergency brake. That's the other thing. It was, for a second, triggered the emergency braking on the Fiat. The Acura that I just talked about, that was a separate incident. Now I think of it, those were the three things. So I guess whilst I like the Fiat, that technology feels like it's not quite tuned in properly yet, even for the kind of people who like it. And I obviously hate that kind of technology. But I quite like this little Fiat despite it asking me, overweighting on me and the emergency braking going off because it said I was too close to the traffic in front. It's like, who's driving, me or you, car? Like, I'm driving. So from the sublime to the ridiculous. Because it went from the Fiat 500 to the Dodge Durango Hellcat. I think it was some silver bullet, last call, get a gas guzzling V8 while you can kind of special edition. Silver, matte black hood, really looked good. This is a 3-row SUV with a 707 horsepower supercharged V8. Nice bull's blood leather interior in it that actually was kind of nicer than the rest of the interior. There was that kind of sort of a mismatch, and I sat in it and I'd driven it before I looked at the price. And were it the same price as the Genesis and the Lexus, you might allow your heart and that epic engine to win you over. But hand on heart, even a dyed-in-the-wool confirmed gearhead like me, were it my money, for the same money, I'd take the Genesis GV Coupe over the Hellcat Durango. That's if they were the same money. But the GVs, they were 70 to 80-ish. This Hellcat was 115, 113. One was 115, one was 113. It was the range in the Durango were the two most expensive. I'm here to tell you, the Durango felt overpriced. It felt like a you taking the piss because this is not in the same. The build quality was not even like close to the Lexus, and the Lexus is like 30 grand less. Like you could have had the Lexus and the Elantra N instead of the Hellcat. But that's missing the point, isn't it? The last Best of the Bay, I wasn't able to make it because I wasn't able to go for the whole time, but their best car was, the Best of the Bay that they picked was a stick shift Acura. And, Michael did joke at one point, what were you going to do if the Hellcat won kind of thing? And, I'm a sufficient Luddite that I steeled myself to make a good judgment and not allow myself to be blinded by that epic engine, because I knew the engine was going to be impressive. And it was, right? It is an awesome thing. One of the awards that we had to give was the best piece of technology. And honestly, without a trace of facetiousness, the best piece of technology we experienced there wasn't the Lucid's regen braking, which I'll talk more about later on, but that's an awesome feat of engineering. I mean, that is an awesome feat of engineering, but it is not in the same league as 707 horsepower of supercharged V8 let loose on the highway. That is just a thing unto itself. So you're never allowed to forget about the engine. In sport mode, it's incredibly loud. In normal mode, it's bloody loud. You don't ever forget that this car's about the engine. It's like a Porsche 911 or a Suzuki GSX-R. The tack is right in the middle and the speedo and all the other stuff is just off to the side. It's got all these track modes and launch modes. I didn't play around with any of that stuff. I just got out on the highway and pressed the loud pedal. For a while, I looked at those Ram SRT-10 pickup trucks. This is a Ram pickup truck with a Dodge Viper 8-litre, normally aspirated V10 in it. In concept, it's pretty cool. They can't tow that much, but you can tow a car in them. The gas mileage is bad, but what would you expect? They're expensive to maintain, but what would you expect kind of thing. But really what put me off is that for a truck, you want torque, and this is a race motor that makes all its power high up. So really, people just use them for burnouts and then sell them. A lot of them have a very high number of owners. So as I sort of passed out that I didn't really want this SRT-10 truck, one of the things that always stuck in my mind about them was that motor in the Viper makes it like a 200 mile an hour car, 190, 200 mile an hour car. The truck can do 140 aero limited. And I would never have thought that, I'd have thought 500 horsepower was 500 horsepower. If an E-Type with 270 horsepower can knock on the door of 150 miles an hour, if my AMG Mercedes de-restricted when new, a 2000 and, W210 E55 supposedly, according to Wikipedia, de-restricted, can do 175 miles an hour, 350 horsepower Ferrari Daytona, 350 horsepower AMG Benz. This is mid 170s, isn't it? So it seems to me, I thought, 500 horsepower would inevitably mean that you were looking at more than that. But the aero effect is significant in the case of those Rams. The same is the case with this Durango. And I was surprised by how aero limited it was. It was pretty stable at high speed. It certainly was fun. It certainly is more fun. There is a difference in the organic power delivery of a gasoline or diesel powered vehicle versus the electric whoosh of an EV, right? There is a difference. So it's not about the amount of horsepower, it's the way that the power is delivered. And that contrast was actually most noticeable between the Ioniq 5N and the Elantra N. It's just the way the power comes in, and the Elantra just left me feeling like an old pair of slippers, whereas the Ioniq 5 left me feeling like I feel like halfway between a PlayStation and real life. The Durango's definitely on the real life section. It's an absolute beast. I wonder if the price is even relevant, because this is a future classic. Like, you can't get that V8 anymore after this year. You can't get it in a sedan or coupe wrapper even now. It's over. And yes, this new inline six that they do, they're going to turbocharge for more power soon enough. But this Hellcat is the last of the American V8s. And if you look at that in that context, it's not the last as the Ford Mustang will be, but if you look at it in that context, it seems a bit silly to wrap it in a 3-row SUV body, to be honest. Like, I feel like, if you want a Hellcat, buy a 50 grand Challenger and a 50 grand Hemi Durango, and yeah, To say I was underwhelmed is completely the wrong thing. I wasn't underwhelmed. Like, I loved it. Like, I drove further than I drove any of the other cars, drove beyond the end of the designated test route, and I still didn't want to turn round. And I drove up a little lane, and the surface was rough and it was twisty. And I wanted to fling it down there and see how it rode the bumps and see if I could try and make a case for a 700 horsepower 3-row SUV. And I got out and walked around it and took pictures and was smitten with it. But not only was it not the best, it just wasn't the most charismatic, just complete package. It was reminded me a lot of that SRT 10 Ram. That the engine was epic and the idea of a pickup truck was epic, but you don't want mustard on ice cream. And that was how I felt. The mustard belongs on the roast beef and the chocolate sauce on the ice cream. And, that engine in the GV80, now I see why people love Hellcat Chargers, why the Chargers was so popular, even alongside the Challengers. So I wrote down that it had a Harman Kardon stereo, which you'd expect for the price point, wouldn't you? The lovely smell, Alcantara steering wheel, so it felt sporty. It had a fan seat, so like you could have the cool air blowing up your ass crack, and the Alcantara steering wheel being heated, and that was pretty cool. I wrote noisy and guttural, even in normal mode, let alone sport. The modes were really easy to use, and it was easy to sort of bespoke up the suspension, and you could do that on the fly, so that felt really usable. There is a noticeable supercharger whine, and it is a million times cooler than that irritating EV whine. Like, Here Comes the Milk Float that a couple of the cars had. Yeah, I just wrote, the motor is always there. So the Acura ZDX. So this is maybe more familiar to a lot of you as the Honda Prologue. I know somebody in the school pickup line is one of these Honda Prologues, and where a lot of SUVs are going down the sort of narrow, tall kind of design, more like Rivian, more like the Land Rover Discovery, and the Lexus is an example of that. The Prologue sort of the opposite of that, in that it's wider and lower. So it actually appears more like a sort of squarer, wider station wagon, traditional American station wagon or estate car, than it does seem like an SUV. I didn't poke around in the trunk properly. I'd got back-ended on the times, and it was the last car of the day, and I've got to say I was feeling tired. So did I give it a fair crack of the whip? I certainly tried. As I mentioned earlier, it got upset with me because it said I was following another car too closely and tried to do the emergency braking on me. 544 horsepower, apparently. So, the thing had plenty of giddy up. It didn't feel that fast. I didn't toggle with the modes very much. And sadly, at the end of the day, it didn't make that much of an impression. I did go back to look at it again afterwards, but I actually was distracted by the Lexus, and I went back and looked at the Lexus. I set out from, at the end of the day when I was looking at stuff right at the end, about before I did my voting, I set out to look at it again to try and form more of an opinion about it, and ended up sitting in the Lexus again and thinking, oh, that's really nice quality. So, maybe within this, right, there's a metaphor for the challenge that Acura have at the moment, which is that, was this a bad product? Absolutely not. But was it in any way memorable in comparison to the other things that I experienced? No, it really wasn't. Is it better objectively than the Hellcat? Of course, like by a country mile. But what the Hellcat had, and in fact what the Genesis has in spades, the sort of design swagger, just the coolness, I'm paying $700 a month for the next 5 years, but this car's bloody cool. I'm not sure if you'd feel like that about the ZDX. I can't remember what the interior looked like. As I say, I was tired. Right, a lot of this might be more about me than about the car, and certainly I did lean on it performance driving wise, and it just as EVs tend to do. It just like did it all. It didn't like fall apart at really high speeds. It just like did it all. I should say as well, the Fiat, enough speed for any normal bear, normal time. You know, I explored that much. So for the Acura, I wrote, the toggling for modes not perfect. Awesome ride, great ride, and it feels planted on the road. So sorry, Acura, that I haven't given you as fair a crack there. I should have really driven that car again afterwards, so sorry about that.
This episode has been brought to you by Grand Touring Motorsports as part of our Motoring Podcast Network. For more episodes like this, tune in each week for more exciting and educational content from organizations like the Exotic Car Marketplace, the Motoring Historian, Break Fix, and many others. If you'd like to support Grand Touring Motorsports and the Motoring Podcast Network, sign up for one of our many sponsorship tiers at www.patreon.com/GT Motorsports. Please note that the content, opinions, and materials presented and expressed in this episode are those of its creator, and this episode has been published with their consent. If you have any inquiries about this program, please contact the creators of this episode via email or social media as mentioned in the episode.